stream going right now, and I'll drop the link in the chat just so we have it. As a note, there's also a chat on the YouTube live stream, so I'll keep an eye on there to see if there's any questions there.
Excellent.
Yeah, so we're live, so feel free to go ahead if you want to kick it off, Robin and Sherwood.
Okay, hello everybody. This is the Hyperledger Climate Action Accounting SIG General Meeting. I'm happy to welcome all of you. Today we have Carrie George as a guest. She's the Vice President and Head of Sustainability and Impact from Everledger, and she will give us, she will report about greenhouse gas reporting across supply chains and moving cloud energy use to renewable resources. And yeah, Carrie, I'm happy to welcome you and feel free to start. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. I'm really excited to meet this group. I didn't know about you, but now I hope to be more and more engaged. I'll give a little preface that I am not a technologist. My expertise is in supply chains and then sourcing of materials. So you'll see that I have a heavy emphasis there, but I'm happy to bring in one of our technologists if you want to really get into the details of sort of how we're looking at this. But what my other area that I'm known for, particularly when I was at Apple, Brilliant Earth, and then at the US State Department, is influencing supply chains or practices in different types of sustainability issues. So I'm going to talk about some of the strategies I'd love to work with this group on, particularly as it relates to cloud energy, and then some of the interoperability goals that I would have for a GHG product. So starting off, I'm just going to go through just some recent legislation and some activities that show that there's clear demand for reporting of GHG. We all know that, but it might be helpful just to break it down into what is being asked for and why. Then looking at some of the Everledger, just general sustainability and more on the environmental side. If you're interested, I'm more than happy to give you some more social and labor and workforce practices. The third point will just be some of the work that I've been doing with the cloud energy providers. And so not the energy providers themselves, the service, cloud service providers, and some of the bumps and challenges that I'm still facing. And I think some of the technologies opportunities, both in developing products, but then also what our core responsibility is, and that would be with our cloud providers and their energy sources. So just talking at a high level, this is a really ugly chart, but it's just to break down what regulations across the world are really asking for. And again, we can mince the details and fine points, but at a high level, we're looking at regulations that are asking for annual reporting on GHG and different types of climate related metrics. Then verification and certification regarding those measurements and that reporting, using specific technical methods, so for calculation and or emissions factors that are preferred. Then thresholds or targets are sometimes established. And then you start getting into issues such as, sorry, I'm just going to close this, the offset guidelines. And so if there are targets, then are there also offset guidelines, the hows and the who's are responsible, and what would be considered acceptable. I'm mostly interested in these last 2 points, is where we're looking at real targets and then taking action. The mitigation and the adaptation is really critical, and especially a lot of the work that Everledger is doing is in mineral markets or mineral related goods. So you're looking at luxury brands with precious metals, diamonds and gemstones, looking at the battery market. And so you're looking at critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, nickel, et cetera. And so the climate change reporting to me is only as interesting as you're actually taking action and mitigating those issues that are identified. And the EU taxonomy really drills this home in their goals. We're looking especially at scope 3. This is nothing new for all of you, so I'm not going to belabor this point, but we know that when you're looking upstream, emissions go well beyond the scope 1 and scope 2 into 5.5 times higher. And really getting that information is the more problematic issue. And if any of you have ever talked to me, you've probably heard some of my horror stories or my glory days, talking about going to hundreds of sites and oftentimes signing individual NDAs myself. So I'm going to, let's say, 10, 20, 30 mines in a year at one point, and then in that signing NDAs as myself, not even as my employer, because of the sensitivity of sharing certain data that's necessary for reporting of critical minerals and source and origin, but not the entire document or the entire disclosure is necessary for something as simple as origin or related to scope 3 reporting. I think what may not always be appreciated when we talk about these offerings is just the cost. One of the reasons that I came from Apple to Brilliant Earth, the jewelry company, and then Brilliant Earth to Everledger was explicitly to test out technologies that maybe in a big company that would be too much to try to do across a huge supply chain. But in smaller companies and more niche activities and with startup pilots, you could really test this out. What's not appreciated is the motivation for that was not just a cool tech, but because of how much time and cost it took just to do this reporting, let alone actually get to the impact. So these are numbers that Everledger tested just with hiring a researcher to say from scratch, go look up GHG reporting on a few mines, just a few refiners, a few manufacturers, and in the battery market. And this could end up being a total of 40 hours plus $6,000 or more of reports that are privately held that you can't get certain information in the public realm. And there's no direct data feeds then for these primary data sources, and that's really just not a very scalable thing, which is one of the many reasons that we're not seeing this scale as quickly and a lot of the issues around sustainability not take shape. There are plenty of companies and plenty of actors within those companies that push back on sustainability and maybe have nefarious or less, I would say, altruistic goals in terms of sustainability. But a lot of times it comes down to the money and the resources to just even get the data needed to take action. So getting that faster and more efficiently is really a critical activity. And when we did this was just for one material set. This wasn't even across all the materials necessary to take into account for battery tracking, let alone across the different types of data. And this is one area, and I'll summarize at the very end, just saying that one of the many goals that I would have would also be how we're reporting data so that we can come into alignment. And I know in some of the work you guys are doing on GHG product of sort by blockchain, that you have some of this work. But one thing that I didn't see, but maybe I missed, is how are we differentiating between data? And I say this a lot, and a lot of practitioners would really praise this. It's a little bit more sensitive when you start talking to the auditing community. But from a practitioner's point of view, we always have to work with different types of robustness of data. You never have perfect data. And so when we're talking about mine level data, a lot of big mining companies will have pretty robust data sets. When you get into, for example, the refining, particularly when this happens in different parts of the world, such as China or India or different areas in Indonesia, et cetera, maybe that data is not readily available, or it's not third-party audited, or they're using a different type of data modeling, and so on. This is just one example of how do we then say give a level of robustness of the data. So it's not that we don't use the data if it is available, but we communicate apples and oranges in terms of quality, availability, third-party verification, et cetera. This is really critical so we don't get stuck on perfect and can still act on good or good enough. And this is an area that I'd love to really dig into with this group in that regard. And this is just an example, just visual that I use with our clients to say, you're going to have lots of different sets of data. Your supply chain actors are going to have lots of different sets of data, and we can mix and match all of this as long as we're clear on what is apples and what are oranges, and then utilize that going forward. And in the model of, most of this legislation, as well as particularly OECD, UN guiding principles, the idea is to show continuous improvement. And that's both on how you're reporting the quality of the data, but then also showing continuous improvement on your actions according to that data. And so I would really love to have further conversations about how to enable that further. But, in a simple Figma here, just to show you, a clean version of what that could look like across one battery, across one supply chain with one source. And then, obviously reporting annually and different forms for clients. This is just going further into, an example of how you could display that. You could be displaying it just a very literal, this is exactly where this source of data could come from. It could include the source of like the actual company and or the emission factor used for that calculation, which in some cases, as I noted in the legislation, certain emissions factors are preferred for certain reporting entities. But then, and this is another area that I'm particularly passionate about, and I'll give you a little anecdotal story. When I was working with, Apple and Brilliant Earth and, even the apparel sector, a lot of the challenges are more than just one company can solve or take on. And that's for a number of reasons. One, that company could change sourcing at any time. You don't want actions on the ground to be dependent on one downstream company. They can change their fashion, their season, their type, their technology, and so on. And so any action on the ground should not be dependent on one actor, but it could be dependent on or reliant on many groups of actors that are dependent on that material source. And so one thing that I think would be is very critical is that we enable technology and environments that allow many actors in a supply chain and a material stream to be contributing easily and effectively to the mitigations that have to happen on the ground. This I'm showing for offsets, and offset maybe renewable energy credit purchasing, but also how do we tie it into then the reporting out of GHG for a product and vice versa. So simple kind of idea here, but I know that, with a quick glance at some of the things you're working on and some of the Hyperledger community, I think we could do a lot more to create this interoperability, to create open source code for certain actors, and be able to utilize our networks just much more effectively for these end goals. So quickly, just talking about what Everledger is as a corporation and what our goals are. We split up sustainability and impact across our product, some of which I just talked to, people, which I won't go through today, but happy to talk about later, and then planet. And I'm just going to give you some high level examples of some of the work we're doing. If we're looking at our responsible travel and work, we've been, doing some of the obvious things that you can do, but we continue to do more. And this was pre-COVID, but we'll start picking this up, as we get back into a world with COVID, but understanding how to operate in that world more effectively. We've been doing a lot with, offsetting directly with our flight purchases and looking at how we can enable fewer flights, proper offsetting, as well as just community impact. When we look at things like our purchasing practices, we do have sustainable purchasing goals and focus on different values of those corporations, the product life cycle, et cetera. One example is just here, I was just excited to talk about our business cards. And, I use very few business cards, especially these days, but, now trying just do more digital engagement overall. But our business cards were made from, offcuts from t-shirts and ensuring that we're using waste streams and then also enabling that they are recyclable. Then other things, just looking at green office measures, and this is something we did even during the pandemic early times. And fortunately, our Australia offices are relatively open, but for everyone else, just talking about energy efficiencies and remote travel, remote work, in addition to reducing commuting travel costs and other things, and enabling that. But let's get into our cloud energy goals. And this is a little bit wordy, please forgive me, but we can go into some of the details. One of the things we're looking at is how do we favor blockchain services that source and buy or buy 100% renewable energy, and so I'll show you a few examples from public information from Google, but there's other examples out there. But right now, Google's the only one that has that 100% either bought or direct sourced renewable energy. So the other thing that we're looking at is for our non-blockchain services, how do we favor service providers that also do the same, in terms of either buying renewable energy credits and or sourcing renewable energy. The other thing that we are looking at doing now is how do we speak to our service providers about the need to transition our services, or ask them to pay for offsets. In the cloud energy world or the cloud storage world and cloud providers, we see a lot of credits being given. So you get a cheaper, data load on this or that service, but we're not seeing those being put to offsets, and we're curious as to why. And we've been having conversations about measurement, and I'll talk a little bit about that for 2 years now. And only recently we're seeing some action by certain cloud providers to take action so that they could report, but it's still really clumsy, and it's still the targets are still well behind a lot of the leaders in this field. So we really need to see that improved. And then, for our 2025 goals, we want to be 100% renewable for all of our cloud uses and providers. And that can still include renewable energy credits, but we are wanting to see that investment and change. And that's also where we want to influence our cloud providers to get really more renewable sources in key regions. And for us, because our founder and many of our team are based in Australia and New Zealand, it's really critical that we see improvements there. And I'll show you some differentiation between Australia and other countries in a moment. But these are some of our now projects and goals, but we are also looking at the future, and that's really where we need to be engaging more with the Hyperledger community on how we really make some of these improvements. We know GHG targets are being established across tech, and particularly recently, you're seeing a lot more influence, especially as with the BlackRock announcement and others, other legislation and regulations being pushed. I think one of the things is you're seeing, and have seen, organizations like Google taking a real aggressive approach to this, and even announcing carbon-free energy by 2030. And if you get a chance, check out their website and some of the work they're doing on how they're defining carbon-free for energy efficiency and other measures. And it's really impressive, and I'm really excited to continue to push their goals, and also push others to further that sort of leadership. This is just a breakdown of how they're talking about it, and looking at carbon-free electricity, and then ultimately moving towards moving the carbon-based electricity away from it. And this is where you can see some key differences where they're buying a lot of renewable energy credits to really neutralize this. So you still see in Taiwan, Singapore, Sydney, and some other regions being still heavily carbon-based, and they are doing those renewable energy credits to counter that. But then you also see a fully carbon-free energy here, and these are the things that we should be paying attention to as a community, how and why we ask for certain goals, and really unite on these fronts. This is where we have the power, and as working with other companies, we were able to really change the sourcing of many material streams and material markets, and we as a community definitely can do so as well. If we're looking at the cloud energy goals as well, you can see, Oracle having 100% renewable use at 94 data centers across 10 countries, really laudable. And we can see more and more of that coming to fruition. And that we're looking at, it's keywords of certified as renewable in 2018, and that they have 62%. How do we continue to grow those targets? So some of the things that we've seen that we believe in terms of just even being able to measure and to show the difference between many companies is that the how do we report on this? And we're getting our investors as well as clients asking, well, how do I know that my carbon impacts aren't affected by your work and on blockchain? And not to belabor that, and I don't have any issues with any blockchain provider, whether you're running proof of stake or proof of work. Sometimes we have to get into the fine-tune points with our clients on that. But I would prefer us as a community, regardless of how we're using energy and of our services, to really focus in on overall making sure that our sources get as clean as possible. So right now, what we do is we can report by our dollar spend, by type of energy, cloud provider service, the service provider, and then the region. And the region is really critical because, as I noted with that image from Google, there's different sources. And so for a lot of companies, they're not actually, or at least several companies, they're not buying the renewable energy credits to completely neutralize their energy sources, and instead are sharing, not sharing, but their energy sources that are still having heavy carbon-based energy, but without buying the renewable energy credits to counter that. In the next phase, what we would like to see is that they're really able to report, our service providers are able to report by total energy used per client, and that we would actually enable that. And that later, we would love to be able to see real energy, uses, data loads, instances, types of blockchains running, and other services, so that we can really start getting into the fine-tune points, and also look at our own cloud computing practices and energy efficiencies. I've tried to read several reports on academic reports on it, and I think we're still in a very immature phase, but I think a lot of you here can provide a lot of insight on that. And this is when we can start really looking at our overall platform and architecture, and then tying that together. So if I look at, for example, this is where I think about this is the energy source. And this is just from the World Bank table a couple of years ago. But, when you look at a comparison of Australia versus United Kingdom and United States, the percentage of coal is pretty significantly different. So it's not just non-renewable, it's coal-based entirely. And how do we start moving key regions towards renewable energy and renewable energy practices as soon as possible? And so this is just an idea, taking out the kind of information specific and just making it a little bit simpler on the top. We could be requesting as a group types of reporting practices consistent with our reporting needs, and then also how we actually operate. And this is something that I think the Hyperledger community could definitely enable. So just the opportunities to summarize, I'll point, in terms of like a GHG product, I think as a team here and community, we could really talk about data taxonomy, different types of key areas that we would want open source code on, whether that be for integrations. As I mentioned, the differentiation of data sources, I think would be really critical. And then, different types of alignment on what could be offset purchasing practices and plugins for that type of enablement. On the cloud energy side, again, data taxonomy for reporting, but also common timelines and targets for service providers. There's a number of targets, and unless you read into the details, you may not realize how different they really are and how far behind some of the service providers really are in their responsibilities as well. clear reporting across different offerings and services. And so that's where we can differentiate between our own responsibility and how we're using that cloud energy, and then joint goals on, you know, problematic regions and energy sources. And I gave you that example of Australia, Singapore, Taiwan being heavily carbon based, but we could be doing a lot more in other regions as well across the world. So I'd love to, you know, continue the conversation, and we'll just pause there and get some feedback and hopefully open for a pretty good dialogue.
Thanks, Carrie, for the first part of the presentation. Is there anyone of the group who has a question?
I can start. Gary, I'm curious, when you're working with different manufacturers, you kind of alluded to the challenge of getting them to provide data. What are some of the key incentives that you think are going to be needed to really kind of open that up? Like what needs to happen for that to really become a reality?
Well, and this is a few areas that we could be working a lot closer together, because this, and I joke, but the technology space sometimes, and again, I haven't worked in this area, but there often is a goal to be one ring to rule them all. You know, it's like the Instagram of everything, the this of everything.
Right.
The reality is that never happens. There's very few things in the supply chain space that it's one group that actually does everything. You don't see that in audits, you don't see in certifications, you don't see in reporting mechanisms, et cetera. So what I would say is that we should be, any of actors that are working on this type of work should be working together to create the one template or one reporting taxonomy that they would use, because that's one of the biggest issues, is that your clients, my clients, they don't even know necessarily how to get the data or report it well. So if we're teaching them a uniform that we say, we are all using Hyperledger ...
Right.
And that's really critical. And I can tell you this, and this is a long-winded answer, but we did not make progress when I was at Apple until we got 3 of the key audit companies, not audit companies, but auditing standard bodies, to agree that they would become mutually recognizable.
Right.
And so then once we did that, then we could ask everyone for 1, 2, or 3, pick your door, go through it. We don't care. And then as competitors, so Apple, Intel, HP, we would all go to our favorite companies. You know, this is my baby, don't touch them. This is my baby, don't touch them. But we were asking for the same things. So even if they were sourcing from an Apple and their buyers were Apple and Intel, but maybe Apple had the bigger buying share, so they wanted to listen to Apple, but they really had to do enough to also accommodate everyone else. We were asking for the same things. So I say that because we don't have that consistency in upstream GHG reporting. And so one of their big points is they're like, I don't want to fill this out 12 times. How do I know that this will count for everyone else? And so we can do a lot to enable that. The second thing is, part of the reason I'm interested in blockchain is some of the other things that they don't want to share. I would sign an NDA, and that meant, and my old COO used to tease me. He's like, oh, you're going to go out and have some more tea with them? I'm like, yes, I am, actually, because that's the only way I can get them to like give me this data. And
Right.
so there was so much trust building, but that's where blockchain should be
Right.
the enabler. Like, that should be the enabler. I spent 7 years of my life literally on a plane. Like, there's no reason that is sustainable, like reasonable or something. So we need to get more consistency of how their data is actually going to be used, how it can be protected. Because as much as we think blockchain's understood,
Right.
no one really understands it practically. And so when I talk to companies, I'm sitting there now telling them, and these are companies that I worked with and they shared stuff with me, they'll say, wait, so if I give you a utility bill, they're not going to see the utility bill. How do I know they're not going to see it? Like, and I literally will just circle what they're, I'm like, no, we're only taking these
Right.
3 things. I need this date, I need this, but I need you to put it here, and then I'll do this, and this is what it looks like. We need 40 tutorials on that, and
Right.
we all need to be in agreement so no one of our community accidentally screw it up. Because that's the other thing, is they don't trust the technology well enough
Right.
to know that, oh, it's not just Carrie George, because I've known you for 10 years, you know, we've had meals, you know, my family. It's no, you and all your people are consistently implementing this strategy in this way. So how I did it was literally meals, tea, all that. Now I have a reputation with a lot of these actors, so they're more likely to engage with me, but I still don't have the reputation of my community and the topics we're talking about them for fully onboarding en masse. So we can do a lot with this community to really start communicating that, to bring together, you know, our own, you know, basic understanding of this is how we do this is how we report, this is, you know, consistent privacy measures on that. And particularly for things like GHG. I mean, that should be a no-brainer. Like, we're all in this together. This only helps everyone if we do it right.
Yep. Thank you.
Hopefully I didn't scare anyone off.
So
And my answers will be
there's a
shorter.
question in the
Fine.
chat.
Follow-up question, or nobody else has a question?
There's a question
Can
in
I
the
ask a
chat.
question?
Please.
Yeah, hi,
How
it's
about
Ike. Can I ask a question?
Can I answer the one that's in the chat? There are questions in the chat. Are you going to write your answers?
Oh, for me, I can.
Elizabeth, you can just place your question that you posted to the chat if you want to.
Okay, how about I start at the top here? Feel free to post your questions. Okay, how do you certify Qantas paid as zero carbon improvement? It is certified forest stewardship on fertile land, which contains specified carbon. Oh, this is a really specific one. We can go through Qantas, United, and everything. I am, for what we have purchased, I did not verify all of those. So I'm reporting exactly what they've reported, but that is something that we can go through each one of those. But several of the air carriers have different offset partners. But I'd be happy to go through and see if there are third-party verified offset partners, you know, but most of which we do. We do planting trees, but we don't call it certification or offset. We do it just because we want to do it for communities in which we're engaging with, and it's not being planned or used. If it's a certified offset partner, the double counting has to be part of it. So that's part of certified offsets, is that it can only be done once. So I assume you know that, so there might be a nuance you're looking for, Elizabeth. But
Yes, because
yeah,
on
yeah,
blockchain, you would be able to actually tag that tree, GPS, tag it. And okay, that's our tree. And look how big it is. You can tell from the Google Earth picture how big it is, that it contains a certain amount of carbon. And so your customer who said, I paid for that tree, can see that tree, and they know where it is, and they know nobody else is using it.
right.
And you know, the person who planted it has a zero carbon footprint and isn't using, you know, huge amounts of gas to get the tree there.
I mean, and those are all amazing applications. I mean, I don't know if you've worked with any of the third-party offset providers. Then their certification is really drawn out. It's really manual. It's really like 1972. I really respect what they're doing, because it had to be done. We needed someone to do it, because otherwise there was double counting everywhere. I would love for, you know, if that's a service you're wanting to provide, that you partner with them so that they can do it 5 times as far and 5 times as efficiently, and grow the offering set as well. Because part of the reason that offsets right now are so clumsy, we buy stuff in North America and the easy places to offset because they're cheaper to offset, as opposed to the places we're destroying, like, you know, the Amazon rainforest, Central Africa, you know, Indonesian forests. You know, these are the areas that we actually need to make sure are being offset, mangroves in certain regions. And so what you're saying, if we can actually enable that faster, more effectively, more consistently, and in the regions that are getting destroyed, so we're offsetting the real things that we destroyed, that would be amazing. But yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I could, if helpful, I don't know if you work with any of those, but I have, you know, my list of my like top 10 that I've bought over the years through my, you know, corporate kind of social responsibility and activities as well as personally. But it would be really cool to continue that, because I think they find you or us a threat, but really we should be complementary. There's less, I tell auditors this all the time. I'm like, I'm actually going to make your job easier, better, faster, and more like prolific. If I do, like, you should be auditing my thing to find the anomalies instead of doing a crappy one-day audit that you might find 2 things and then get yelled at. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, between what you're saying.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great. And feel free, I think you'll have my email after this so we can chat about that. Okay, could you explain how the auditors in this case with Apple worked? I don't remember. So if you're talking about when,
Yeah, what you were saying about the Apple, how
Yeah.
you got different auditor groups to work. Could you explain that a little bit more?
So, and this is on any topic du jour in supply chain management. So, you know, I'm just a kind of a, you know, not like a real techie data person, not a data analytics person. I'm a researcher. So I just look and figure out anomalies in supply chains, areas where there could be positive impact, et cetera. So it could be forced labor, child labor, conflict zones, you know, environmental issues, that sort of thing. What the auditors did, and let me see if I can just pull up something just to, it's a little bit easier to show visual. But what we did with the auditors is there's all these audits that already exist. You don't need to find new audits, right? There's so many that are out there. But what we did with these actors is we look at what they're covering and did it meet the topic of the day. So did it cover child labor, if that's what we're needing to do? Did it cover forced labor? Does it cover, let's say, a certain water or energy issue? And then we utilize those. And so what happened in the case that I mentioned is that these mineral actors, so let me show just a couple of things here. And I'm just gonna share my screen. So like a miner here could be feeding multiple actors. So they were being asked to go through many types of audits, right? Or it could have been a refiner and similarly, you know, sprawled out into a web. And they were being asked to do many types of audits. And so what I did when I was at Apple is, instead of saying, hey, you have to go through my favorite audit, my preferred audit, I said, I'll accept any of these audits, because when I go through it, I found that they're relatively similar. And so here's an example. This is, I think this is Apple's 2018, but in their recent report, they have their 2020. And so these are the standards and audits, and then how they align across different issue areas. Now, this is just a simplified version of what's in the public realm. But what we're showing here is that there could be a number of, you know, alignment areas. And what this did was actually press these actors to become more consistent and make sure they covered the topics that were important. So hopefully that helps, just a little bit of context, but again, happy to go through in more detail with you. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay. What groups do you think are doing the best jobs to allow orgs to work together and set up data and process governance standards? I don't know, Tom. I need to know. Tell me who to work with. I've sat on, and this is no offense to these groups, but you know, Responsible Business Alliance blockchain group, the WEF's blockchain group, OECD's blockchain group, etc. I don't see it driving towards mutual goals for the governance of standards. And so I become a little bit less interested when it just starts getting a little wonky and more talking headish. I check out because I'm not a technologist for technology's sake, and there's no offense meant for anyone who just loves it. It's just not my baby. I don't get up in the morning and think about tech. I think about, the people I've met in Congo and how to enable them to have less air pollution, and, people drowning in mud in Indonesia. And so I am totally trying to utilize it for very specific impacts. But yeah, I don't know. And that's where I got kind of excited. Our marketing person said, would you speak at this event? And I was like, oh my gosh, they look action oriented and techie. I'd love to talk to them. Like, how do I get involved? Why didn't I know about this before? So yeah, Tom, I don't know. I think there's a lot, a potential, but I'm still kind of a novice, even though I've been around for 2 years. I'm still learning about these communities in this realm.
Kind of where, this is Tom, where I am on this is, and if you had said, hey, here's the categorical answer, I would have been super surprised.
Oh.
It's always good to get perspective, right, on it. And I mean, I feel like you, that there's a lot of talking around, and yes, this group is action. I head up the supply chain, or the co-chair of that.
Okay.
So we're trying to work together here better and within the Hyperledger community. With it. But going back to this whole, I'm big on standards, but to your point about data, if it's good enough, let's work with it and the continuous improvement that comes along with that. So maybe just leave it at that for right now, and there's an opportunity to go forward.
I mean, and maybe that's a little bit of what we do, because the standards and the reporting guidelines that I'm seeing from, technology ecosystems still don't say, how do I just differentiate apples and oranges? And if we as a community could say, we'll just always show the differentiation, that's a game changer, because that's a lot of, that's why auditors don't buy technology. That's why NGOs and activists don't buy technology, because they believe we're trying to sell a panacea that's not actually in touch with reality. And if we can just show that small little bit, we could climb a lot farther, go a lot farther with it. So yeah.
I'll share one last thought here, and then we can move on. I'm trying to pull together a thread that says what could even be a template just to do the work, right? Out there, rather than everything's bespoke or custom or whatever you want to call it right now.
Yeah.
And if you're an SME out there, and a lot of these places are, I mean, you're just going to give up and say, forget it. I don't want to go there.
Exactly. And and this is, maybe I'm just lazy. I'll use a lot of the templates that are out there, and I'm trying to say, you want to use RBAs, blah, blah, blah. You want to use this critical minerals, fine. I'll just ingest all of them. That's cool. You just use your favorite baby, whatever you want to do. But PS, these two don't include this data, or this one asks for this unit of measurement and it's different than this one. And so that's a lot of the other areas, because again, and this might be my Oklahoma roots, and I just kind of go with it, kind of chill out, it's whatever, I just try to take it as it comes a little bit. And so that's it's the opposite of trying to guide it and just try to pull it in and keep pushing it forward. But I think we have to do both, to be honest. And we can do a lot more with it. So yeah, I should be part of the supply chain group. Apparently, I didn't know that was one.
We can talk afterwards. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks, Tom. Leanne, to what extent the UN and their global material flows database trying to I haven't worked with the UNEP's global data flows. I don't know if that's the same as the UN Comtrade data. I have worked with that. Leanne Kemp, my CEO, she has been speaking and working with the UNEP's apparel group quite a bit. And I know they have a couple of pilots. I don't know if that's related to the specific material data flow database you're talking about. I heard some vague notion of it, but I didn't follow it. Are you engaging with it?
I'm just wondering, I know the CSIRO in Australia is contributing to creating that database, and they're doing these big CGE models, and they're looking at global carbon and all this stuff. But I'm sort of trying to connect, what is I guess there's top-down approaches and there's bottom-up approaches, and you're mostly talking about kind of self-regulation and private organizing. Is that right?
Well, it's more it's self-reporting, but not self-reporting. It's what I'm trying to do is enable it for regulatory reporting, and so that if you have your own measurement, like let's say you have in-house measurement that you're doing, but you haven't yet gone through the full-fledged audit of XYZ audit set. I still want to enable someone to do that reporting, because on the private sector side, you'll ask a company, I want this report on energy or your chemical use or something. It doesn't mean that it's always audited, right? So I'm trying to enable it at whatever stage of maturity these companies are at for the overall reporting. But for the, you know, the goal of like in this case, I gave GHG reporting, but for material flows, we do, you know, private data. So taking an invoice, like, so B2B partnerships, so that you're actually establishing the chain of custody. I believe the UNEP's material flows as the UN Comtrade data is general flows, but it's not specific flows. So yeah, it's different from what I understand.
And is the reason that companies like Apple are doing this are mainly for their consumers to make choices? Is it that part?
Yeah, it's product level claims. So certain products. So in the jewelry space, you know, someone wants to actually know that that diamond is not only conflict free, but they want to know it helped, like, or, you know, in the case of some of the work we do in Tanzania, like, I want to know that that specific color gemstone helped that woman, that female miner. I want that story. And so that verification has to be related to that specific product. So the chain of custody needs to be established, and all the layering of the data and justifications and evidence are necessary. In the case of Apple on conflict minerals, that was a regulated requirement. The US Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act in section 1502 actually required this type of reporting. And so they had to do a certain amount of chain of custody, and then, you know, through a number of different other things, pull in data and say whether or not they did or did not have products that were associated with conflict or those benefiting from conflict. So that was a very specific claim. That was more like we want to be able to say we don't have, or that we are appropriately addressing the issues. And so what Apple said, which I stand behind and think is very much the right thing, instead of saying I have zero of this, because most supply chains have zero of anything, they say we were taking the necessary actions to do so, and they could justify that through the connections and weaving of the supply chain. So even when they found specific issues of conflict or other things that could be associated with their supply chain, that it was traced to their supply chain, but maybe not traced to the specific product because there wasn't that level of traceability, they could show that they had done appropriate steps to mitigate it and to follow up and to address those issues. So, and that's, I think the UNEP's material flow database is trying to create that high level to inform companies so that then they do take action in their specific supply chains. But I'd have to go back to it because I only have like this vague notion of that it was going on, and I haven't worked with the specific data. Thanks, Lan. Okay, Aaron, you suggested a standardization program of auditing. How is it essentially system established? Aaron, can you give me a little bit more context? I'm not sure I totally follow. Oh, maybe Aaron had to leave.
Sorry, I was just trying to hit,
Oh, there you go.
to press. Sorry about that. Yeah, we're in a project right now that we're doing. Our protocol that we're using is just standardized to the industry within real estate, construction, emission credits, and so forth. But we're starting to have additional industries come into this project to participate, because it's a a group exchange of a currency. And so with that, the standardization, there's got to be a group or frontline as we start reporting data, because one of the things that you just brought up that I thought was remarkable, like the story of the diamond. Most people aren't going to know the story of the diamond when the diamond's cut. They're not going to know this longevity of it. But all of a sudden that story all of a sudden comes out and says, oh no, I remember when this, and then all of a sudden to be able to link that information to another part in the blockchain that all of a sudden allows that story to be told. It's like, how are we, at what point in this supply chain is there a straight standard of this information? I mean, I see your charts, I see those examples, and I understand that. I understand that well, especially being in construction. But how do you get so many people under the same umbrella when they don't understand really a lot within their own industry? What's going on with them?
Well, I will say supply chains aren't necessarily the nicest thing, as you can appreciate, in the construction industry. So I wouldn't say we were gentle with getting people on board. There is very strict timelines and very aggressive goals set, and those aggressive goals trickle down. I'll give you an example. One of my suppliers, when I first came from the State Department, and I was, I'd worked in consulting, I'd worked in auditing industry and different things, but I would say I was a little bit of a much more mild mouse at that time. And I had a supplier, I'd sent out an email, and the supplier called me and was really gracious. And he just said, Carrie, I just want you to let you know that when Apple gets a little sniffle, just a little pre-cold, everyone else gets the worst flu imaginable. And that's a little bit hard to say today with the pandemic, but it was a really good lesson that when you're at the top of the food chain, you can be a little bit of a gorilla without having to do too much, and it trickles down pretty well. It's not enough. And so at that time, because it was legislated, all the companies had to either swim on their own or agree on timelines. So we agreed on general timelines of what we were going to go for, and certain audits that groups of audits that we would account for, because the materials that were in the legislation weren't just in one industry. So they already had their preferred audits and preferred practices. And we just said, okay, XYZ audit company or audit organization or standards body, you don't cover this topic well. In order for us to mutually recognize you across these others, we need you to reconsider this or up that and that sort of thing. And so that was about a 3-year-long process. And then once that happened, it went through the roof, in terms of agreement. So it wasn't necessarily really centralized. It was just more collaborative and, in techie speak, interoperable.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you very, very much for that explanation. But it really, one of the things that you just really pointed out is that since we're in control of the project and we're in control of what we're doing, we just got to play that role of the gorilla. It says, here's the standard you're going to follow. You're going to be a part of this. This is it. Follow.
Yeah. And if you have to be honest with yourself, if you're big enough to be the gorilla, and if you are, go for it. If you're not big enough, you get a few other gorillas or smaller orangutans or something. I don't know how to continue that, but yeah, just get enough of the parties on board. Obviously, because of certain antitrust issues, you can't talk about price. You can't talk about actually firing a specific actor or anything like that. But you can absolutely say timelines, goals, strategies, mutual recognition of standards, etc.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. We're getting close to the end here. Okay, following Tom's question, which standards are most common that leading companies use? Specifically on GHG, I can, Paul, if you just want to shoot me a note, I can just send you a list that we're looking at, but we're not comprehensive, and I'm not an energy expert. I'm just a sustainability person in data. So I just look at regulations and how they are, but I can, I'd be happy to share with this group, that information, especially if we can continue the conversation, it would be excellent.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, 3 minutes to spare. Everyone gets 2 minutes of their life back. Get a coffee.
Thanks for that, Carrie. And I just put a link in the chat. This is not the end of the opportunity to talk. We do have open forums where people can talk with each other and continue the conversation. The group has a mailing list. The supply chain SIG also has a mailing list, so feel free to use either of those resources. There's, this group also meets regularly. We'll meet again in a couple of weeks. So, if any questions, ideas, suggestions that have come up in this call that you want to continue talking with people about, please use those forums.
Yes, thanks, Carrie. This was amazing, and you did a great job in the Q&A. Some people asking want to reach out to you. Do you want to leave an email address, or is it better to reach out to you via LinkedIn? Or
No, please don't reach out to me on LinkedIn. I never check my messages. So here, should I send it here, or can you just send a group email to the people, or what would be best?
Yeah, we can do it in the group email.
Just send a group email with my email, and that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Hey, Carrie, could I get you on one last question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is Aaron again. Okay, well, we're going to look at, we're establishing our regulations and guidelines here for the U.S. How hard or what challenges should we plan on looking for as we're being invited to go into other countries?
Oh, just in construction in general, or are you talking?
Well, just in the standardization of this program. The standards are fairly the same, but when it comes to data reporting, we want what we're doing here to be able to be duplicatable over there.
And this meaning the work that this specific group is doing, or that your company is doing?
There are companies doing, and as well as the other companies that are working with us on this.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the region and the reporting format and your clients and things. But yeah, there's probably a handful of things, but I can copy and paste, some of the stuff that we've pulled together on, reporting protocols and that sort of thing. But in terms of just going out to other countries, like to gather GHG data or other things, there's going to be emissions factors and how the calculations should be rolled out, the level of data and understanding the lack of data that's there. So there's going to be a lot of, like, if you're trying to really develop the ecosystem, there's going to be a lot of placeholders. So we as a community could even be creating common data sets that we all can reference, or that, data, not databases, because I never want to create new databases, but how to reference existing data sources. There's a handful of things like that I think we could probably, have a longer conversation on.
Okay, well, if there's a way to get a hold of you to get a chance to contact you, I'd
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Yeah, feel free, everyone.
This kind of expanded, and now we've just got some people that got some really high-end goals, and so we're trying to keep everybody under control. But as I said, everybody's just so excited, because it's the money. One of the biggest factors is money and funding, and when there's money and funding available, they like to move it around, and that's okay. We don't mind if it goes out of the U.S.
Yeah,
but we want to make sure the data's right.
Yeah, exactly.
So
no, that's right. That's exactly right.
All right, thank you.
Excellent. Okay.
Right. So see you in 2 weeks. And Carrie, thanks so much again. And I will send you email address to the group, and looking forward to keeping in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Take care.